This is a rather straightforward video. Based on the title, you'll understand one thing. We believe this is going to be a future classic, the Miata ND2. Doesn't matter what trim level you choose, essentially, as long as you have a manual transmission, this is a car in 20 years you're going to look back on and think, what happened? And it isn't till recently when we started driving all of these massively high horsepower cars, these very, very expensive cars, really across the board, SUVs, cars, sports cars, and vehicles that have gotten insanely heavy as well. And if you enjoy driving, you start to adapt, right? You're like, okay, this is the future. This is how things are going to go. What are the pros and cons of it? Where can you find some joy? Until the joy starts to disappear out of the driving experience. And when we had the ND2 Miata RF Club on the schedule, like, why are we driving this again? We already did a documentary on every generation of the car. We talked to the engineers, the designers behind it. We told the story, and we got everything done that we possibly could get out of driving those cars. Until it showed up and I drove it in not so great weather. It was cold, it was rainy, and something clicked for me. Something changed, and I think it changed for Jack and the other people that drove this car. And if you're an owner, you know what we're talking about, but you may not really appreciate what you have. So we're going to take it for a quick drive, talk through some of the things about it, and then I'm going to conclude this video. Jack, we have a lot to talk about today.
Oh, we do.
ND2 Miata, before it gets refreshed, let's reconnect.
We've done everything we can with this car, Mark.
And then some. So let's go back and discuss the pros and cons, please. Oh! Some wheel hop to start off.
We're in an RF, which means I don't fit.
An RF Club.
Yes. I have maybe half an inch to an inch between my head and the roof. I know when we've done comparison tests in the past, and I was the misfortunate one to shoot our POV in this car, I had to assume like a yoga position to drive this thing. And we talked about it a little bit off camera, and we've talked about this interior space a million times. This car does not work if you are someone with responsibilities outside of just carrying yourself and 3 items. There's no place for your wallet, your phone, the trunk's small. This is really a car for most people that has to be a secondary vehicle. And because of that, it becomes infinitely more expensive than something like a GR86, which can be your only car. But when you drive it, this is on another planet of enjoyability.
That's one of the most enjoyable cars, and to your counterpoint, that was exactly what they were trying to do during this design phase of this. Because let's face it, when we look at almost every other car now, it's always about excess. It's about having more than you need, right? And this thing is about having just the right amount of what you need. So there's just a fraction of an inch above your head. There's just a marginal amount of space just to say you have something. And that's also, when you drive this on the street more so, why you really appreciate it when you can actually drive it. Clearly, like every car on the planet, once you get stuck in traffic, there's nuisances to it. But we've gotten out of a lot of expensive cars, a lot of expensive fast cars that we argue all the time that are completely wasted in the experience of you can't use them. And you get out here, and I'm not gonna say that you're gonna drive this like a monkey all the time, but when you do, it's so much fun. You can go so fast and still enjoy the speed that's here. The car is so light, and it really is. This is probably one of the lightest cars that you can possibly get. There's something to be said about having a brake pedal that's connected to the brakes, steering that feels something that you feel. Like, I went over a couple bumps earlier, and I'm like, oh my God, there's a bump and a clunk in the back. What is that? It's because you're actually feeling something through the rear suspension into the seat. Like, that's all isolated out in almost every car, including almost 95% of sports cars now.
Yep. I think the best thing about this car is that when you get behind the wheel and you've had a shitty day, that this is an experience. And even in this experience where it's raining and the roads aren't that great, you're still having a good time. and fast. Fast is relative. This feels fast at 65 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I think I always tell this story to people. You and I, many years ago, were in an ND1 club while I was still in university, and I was helping you film that video. And I went around a corner. You and I both thought we got about to get pulled over because it felt like we were doing 90 million miles an hour. I looked down, we're doing 45.
Right.
And the cop was like, it's a 55 mile an hour zone, right? You could do what,
Yeah.
That's the fun part about this car. We were out here with E-Ray last week, and that car isn't fun until you're doing triple digit speeds.
You're right. That's kind of my point is we're desensitized to speed because of these fast cars.
And they're so isolated.
And they are isolated, so to get to a level where you feel something driving them requires excessive amounts of speed and danger. Like, when you got behind the Lucid, that thing is, you're at 150 miles an hour in an unbelievably fast time, and to feel anything, you're essentially sliding the car at 120 miles an hour to be like, whoa, look at this.
Yeah.
To create some drama, where this car doesn't require that amount of excess. It doesn't require that amount of excess in capital to have fun in here. And I think that's the other part of this thing that I really love. Consumables are low because of it. It has no weight. You can buy tires for cheap. You can buy brakes for cheap. You're not going to have to do that. The running costs are super low all the way around this car, and you're getting over 30 miles per gallon, like without trying 30 miles per gallon. I know we talk about that with every Miata video, and you're gonna say this car, how could you justify this car when there's other performance sports cars? But when you get out of those and you come back in here down to reality of like, could I own this and drive it as a secondary car, as a fun car? There's not too many times we're gonna get behind the wheel of this thing. Winter, wet, dry, doesn't matter. On the street, it's one of the most enjoyable, fun cars on the planet, and it still looks great.
Yes.
It's still functional. Infotainment, nobody gives a shit about that, despite that being horrible. Like, it's just an amazing car.
And I think the thing that I appreciate about this now, particularly after spending a year and change with the GR86 and now being in a GR Corolla, that the thing that I love about this car is the engine wants to rev, and despite it making like 1 horsepower, it has character. The GR86 engine makes way more power than this.
Oh, yeah.
And doesn't have anywhere this level of like wanting to be wound out.
It's the sense of immediacy of having a naturally aspirated engine that's calibrated
good
well.
one, yeah.
For this car, right? They knew how to calibrate it. And it's little things like going sideways in the wet, like that feel that your right foot on the throttle and all of that input between the wheels, the engine, there's not a lot of delay, and it's not a synthetic. It's actually mechanically there to connect you with the car, and how you control the yaw and all of that. It creates this level of confidence. And yes, we had some problems with the modern, like the CX-90, because I feel like they're trying to inject a lot of the DNA that they've had in a car like this to a 3-row and some of these bigger. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Where this is like a masterpiece of like how you create a driver's car experience, and all the work that went into doing that, the attention to detail, not just on the way it looked and all that, but the actual connection to the driver. It's so rare, it's so special that, I've appreciated. I didn't even look forward to getting into this car, but I've actually enjoyed driving this car more than about 98% of the things that we've been in the past like 6 months to a year.
I think my counterpoint to this car is if you are you could look at this very objectively and be like, does this fit my lifestyle? Because you're realistically going to need a second car.
Yes, 100%.
But if you're viewing this as a track car versus a road car, your opinions of where it's priced, at least new, may change pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Because the reality part of this is it's slower than, at least the ND2 is slower than a GR86.
Yes.
Stock for stock. The suspension tuning is geared, like we talked about in our documentary style film, around like this, having a good time on the street. And it's super soft. And when you put stickier tires on it, like you probably will, it feels even more
exaggerated. The body motions are exaggerated.
Where there isn't good body control, so you got to throw dampers on it. And like, really, what we tell everyone and all our viewers who do it are really happy with it, get Öhlins.
Yep.
And they're $3,000. By the time you do tires and everything, this becomes almost a high 30, almost $40,000 performance car. And then at that point, there are other options that you could probably get into that, at least on track, I'm not saying you'll have more fun, but it'll at least be a lot more capable.
Just to say this, to kind of close this discussion, and this is the Club Edition, and it rides amazing. Like, there's literally nothing to complain about
Tremendous
as a road
car.
car. It's just unbelievable how good it is, and you have one of the few suspension setups of any street car where we can take this and get an alignment today to do caster, camber, tow, like actual real alignment without having any aftermarket bullshit to it.
I would take this on a back road, not a racetrack, but a back road, or even a racetrack under like 8/10 over any other car new for under $40,000. It's more entertaining than a Elantra, GR Corolla, Civic Type R, GR86, Mustang, EcoBoost.
Yeah, right.
On a back road than any of those vehicles. There are lots of compromises, but if you don't know what driving joy is and you get into one of these cars, you can probably experience for the first time. My buddy Yanal owns one of these things, and he never owned a real sports car, a Veloster before this, and he got it, and he loves this car because it gives you the connectedness and the joy that is reserved primarily for really, really expensive cars.
That's the intangible of this car, is that it makes you feel like you're driving something special. Like, it does. It feels like it is a special car. And you said, it has to be a second car, and I would agree. This is more of a toy. It has to be a second car, but it's one of those second cars that, namely on the used market, I was talking to you about this.
20 grand.
20 to 30 grand. That's not a big ask if you already have a family
For this
SUV
level
or a
of
family,
joy.
yes, that you're getting for that type of money, where you could physically afford to buy this and have a good time on the weekends.
So Mark, it's time to end this philosophical conversation so I can get back to my vets.
Yeah, of course, you can go back to your 1,000 horsepower car and complain about how this is too slow. Now, if you've made it this far listening to Jack and I talk about driving the Miata again, it hit me while making this. It's been 8 years since my first ND Miata video, and I remember arguing about this car with Scott in the shop, like, why does this car make so little horsepower? 4 cylinders from the 90s made more. I never would have thought we'd be where we're at today. So much has changed, and there's an infection in the automotive industry and in the tech industry that is spread to almost every single product. Some of it has to do with social media, some of it has to do with marketing. But what we've seen is things from sedans to compact crossovers to SUVs become heavier, more expensive, more technology laden. And what perpetuates this is a lot of the marketing, like that you need all this technology in cars to make them better driving, to make them better or safer for consumers. You have tech reviewers that are constantly like, oh, look at how great this is. And then it's in the landfill in a year or two. And the same thing is happening with cars. You look at what's being shown as like, oh, you have to have this. And then you look at your bank account, or you look at a car like the Nismo Z that's $65,000. You look at Type Rs that are almost $50,000, Mustangs that are $70,000, and now EVs that are pushing 5,000 pounds or more. They make a ton of horsepower. They have all this technology in them. But where will they be in 20 years? You can't even afford this as a second car. This is a second car that I'm sitting in. Most of these sports cars are still going to be second cars, but they're twice as expensive of some of the old fun sports cars that we used to have. Do you need 500 horsepower? Do you need 400 horsepower in a street car? You can't even use half of it. Do you need to be replacing your brakes for $15,000 a pop if you do carbons? I mean, this is where we're at, and I don't know how it's sustainable. And I don't know how normal people get excited about driving cars anymore with this philosophy that we've pushed forward. And we're going to sit back, well, people don't buy fun cars anymore. Well, of course not. But I'll tell you what, in 20 years, you're going to be clamoring to get your hands on a car like the ND Miata. That when you get behind the wheel for the first time, you're like, why didn't more companies make more of these? Why didn't this formula survive? And a lot of people that own cars like the ND2 Miata are going to be smiling ear to ear that they bought one when they did. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.